Well, greetings to the brightest audience in America, and welcome back to the hydroplate controversy journey that we're going on. We're looking at the correspondence that's been going back and forth discussing the plagiarism and that has been holding back the hydroplate theory. And the reason we're doing this is because there's a theory that makes accurate predictions and it's not being discussed. It's not even being presented, and it's been kicked to the curb, and that should not be happening because this is a theory that accurately explains 25 major features on Earth and in the solar system, explains where the water came from and where it went during the flood. It accurately explains how Grand Canyon can form. And so we've got it, but it's being kicked to the curb, and I believe it's because there's some can of worms that people don't want to deal with. And so we're gonna continue the path and continue the journey of exposing exposing this to the light so people can get all the information to make informed decisions. And again, we're just doing this so people know where to find these documents and read for yourself. This is plate.org. And there you go. You go down to hydroplate resources, down to hydroplate controversy, go up to the top, hit the hydroplate timeline. And then we're going to take, again, a walk down memory lane. This is when Walt Brown, he tried to do it privately and they wouldn't happen. So they agreed to arbitration. Then they backed out. And then Walt Brown went through mediation and they broke that. And so now we want correspondence. Let's see, where were we? And you can just click on this and that'll get you where it was. Between Lee and Whitmore, I think we just did that one. And then correspondent history, between Lee and Baltimore, maybe not. Helping or hindering, where are we at? I think ICR to Lee, we did that one. Brown's thing. What did we do here? Henry Morris, that's the one that we just finished. Henry Morris, I do believe. What's after that? What's after Henry Morris? Between Lee and Whitmore. Yep, that's where we're going. So you can just click on that and you can see the correspondence. And what I really like is when we can see the documents themselves. Okay, here we go. The above email was sent to a known good address to Whitmore. It did not bounce. Okay, here we go. Correspondence history between Pastor Kevin Lee and John Whitmore pertaining to Pastor Lee's July 6, 2009 letter documenting Dr. Austin's plagiarism and poor science being featured in AIG's museum. Okay, here we go. Yeah, here, it's close. A little bit too big. Okay, a little bit smaller. It doesn't do little bits. It always does big jumps like that. Okay, that's too big. Sorry. A little bit more. That might work. Look at that. Okay. July 6, 2009. Dear Dr. Whitmore, this must be from Pastor Kevin Lee. I have attached a preliminary letter that I believe requires your very careful attention and response. It documents Dr. Austin's plagiarism of Dr. Brown's work on the Grand Canyon, and more importantly, how Dr. Austin's actions have had such a detrimental effect on the creation science movement. As you know, you have become involved in this dispute because of Austin's attempt to cover up his plagiarism by using your 1985 term paper, and specifically your map showing the Batahachi Formation. You may recall that on April 18th, I emailed you making a second and final request that you send me a copy of your 1985 term paper so I could review the documentation and correct the record accordingly. You never did. As you read the attached, you will see that the letter and its two attachments contain links to documents which contain Austin's own words, which prove that he plagiarized Dr. Brown. It also documents your involvement in his attempt to cover up his plagiarism, including sections of email that you and I traded over a year ago. I told you then that unless you and Austin could provide documentation to support your rebuttals, that the entire matter will go public on the internet and in a book. Dr. Whitmore, now is the time for you to refute my letter and to show that your work in 1985 supports what you and Austin have claimed. I want to give you every opportunity to correct me if I have misunderstood the matter in any way. If you can provide documentation showing where I have erred, I will make the necessary corrections. If you cannot, and others who are also being solicited for rebuttal and comment cannot, then the attached letter with its attachments will be posted at our website as written. It will also be distributed to about 200 organizations, creationist organizations with a website presence. You may note that some of the links may not be active, but they will be by the time the actual posting in August. I think we read this. This might be similar. Yeah, this is pretty similar. Okay. I encourage you to stop propping up Austin's deceptions and instead start taking steps that can undo the damage you and Austin have already caused for the creation science community. You may not realize that on May 6, 2008, Dr. Brown sent Dr. Austin a copy of EndNote 34 in Brown's Grand Canyon chapter. See attachment. This is a month before it was placed in his 8th edition. Brown offered to correct any errors Austin could identify or remove the entire EndNote if Austin publicly corrected the record. Austin ignored this offer. Unfortunately, 30,000 copies of that are now in print, not to mention on the internet. Many people are reading it. It contains your name. I will be leaving for Africa tomorrow and will not return until July 25th. Feel free to respond now if you wish. Some of my assistants are very familiar with the material and may be able to assist you and the others that are receiving the preliminary letter. However, some matters may have to wait till I return. The above email was sent to a known good address of Dr. Whitmore. It did not bounce. The email was backed up by a certified letter sent to Dr. Whitmore's mailing address. Dr. Whitmore has not responded to the email or the letter. Okay, well, that was pretty quick. Okay, correspondence history between Lee and Vardamar. It's probably real similar. Okay, correspondence between Pastor Lee and Larry Vardamar pertaining to Pastor Lee's July 6th letter documenting Steve Austin's plagiarism and poor science being featured. Dear, July 6th, dear Larry Vardaman, I understand from talking to Joe Bardwell that you are the author of the upcoming True Peer Review. True Peer Review. Okay. All right, we're close. We'll just do it this way. It shouldn't take too long, I don't think. True Peer Review, and are recently familiar with Dr. Brown's 8th edition. I also know that you have been aware of the controversy concerning Dr. Austin's plagiarism of Dr. Brown's work on the Grand Canyon, which I contend has had a detrimental effect on the creation science movement. I have wondered if you have played a role in rejecting my plea to the ICR leadership when I visited ICR on June 6, 2006. In the attached letter, I reference my 2006 letter to Mark Rashi, who in turn gave it to ICR's leadership. There is a link to the letter and it will probably recall those events for you. I am sending you this pack of information because based on your possible connection to that letter. Since you know almost all the players, you may be able to shed some light on how matters have deteriorated so badly within the creationist community. Controversies such as this should never happen among Christians, and I pray that you would consider taking a role in correcting matters before more damage is done. You may not realize that on May 6, 2008, Dr. Brown sent Dr. Austin a copy of EndNote 34 in Brown's Grand Canyon chapter. See attachment. This was a month before it was placed in the 8th edition. Brown offered to correct any errors Austin could identify or remove the entire EndNote if Austin publicly corrected the record. Austin ignored his offer. Unfortunately, 30,000 copies of that are now in print, not to mention on the internet. Many people are reading it. I will be leaving for Africa tomorrow and will not return until July 25th. Feel free to respond now if you wish. Some of my assistants are very familiar with the material and may be able to assist you, and the others that are receiving this preliminary letter. However, some matters may have to wait till I return. Sincerely, Pastor Kevin Lee. The following is Dr. Verdemel's Institute for Creation complete response. My comments, Kevin Lee, are indented. Dr. Brown's input, where needed, is also indented. Okay, so this is how, well, before my response to Dr. Vardaman was distributed and posted, it was sent to him for his comments on October 6, 2009. On October 10th, 2009, in a face-to-face meeting at a creation conference in Washington State, I asked Dr. Vardamar if he had read this response. He said he had not. I handed him a hard copy. He refused to take it. I told him that his letter to me contained many false statements, which are rebutted with documentation. I asked if portions of his letter to me were based on information he received from Dr. Austin. He said they were. I told him that my response to this false information from Dr. Austin and false information from Dr. Vardamar himself were going to result in Dr. Vardamar looking bad. He said he didn't care. I told him that for the sake of truth, I had to post this information unless he changed some of what he wrote. He told me he wasn't going to devote any time to doing so, so he told me to do what I had to do. Okay, Pastor Kevin Lee to, this is from, okay, this is July 13th, 2009, apparently from Vardamar. Yeah, Vardamar. Dear Pastor Lee, I have not responded to your many emails and letters demanding redress of perceived grievances against Dr. Walt Brown and his flood model because I have concluded you are incorrect about the situation and are stirring up strife among the brethren inappropriately. Pastor Lee says, Dear Dr. Vardaman, I fear that you must have failed to read my July 6th letter and documentation carefully. If you had, you would have seen that I am not demanding anything. I am not asking for redress of perceived grievances against Dr. Brown on this flood model, and the documentation proves that I am not incorrect on the assertion that Austin plagiarized Brown. And as a result, bad science is now on display at Kent Ham's AIG Museum. Please show me where my letter asks for redress pertaining to Dr. Brown's hydroplate flood model, or where I ask for any redress for that matter. I am simply asking, for the sake of the truth and for the sake of the creation movement, not for Dr. Brown, that AIG stop using plagiarism, documented fact, including Austin admitting so in writing, and bad science in their museum. This is not about redress of wrong suffered by a person. It is about stopping the spread of false information. The strife is being stirred up by those who embrace falsehoods and bad science. Should a parent be condemned for stirring up family strife when he or she tells their children to stop telling fibs and come clean and correct matters? Of course not. And the same holds true when adults, especially professing Christians, Colossians 3:9, challenge each other and to depart from speaking, teaching falsehoods, and instead embrace the truth. Just like in a family, the strife stops when the fibbing stops. Very little is at stake in childhood story making, but the souls of men are at stake when creation ministry organizations know or should know that they are feeding people incomplete or false information. How many have lost their trust in the Bible because they were taught the biblical flood of Noah occurred when a supposed vapor canopy surrounding the flood collapsed and flooded all living things, and that it was the canopy that allowed people to live for 900 plus years before the flood? Millions believe this falsehood before because they heard it from ICR and AIG. You have been perhaps the leading researcher for the canopy theory for more than 20 years and have known its fatal flaws. Many, through mocking and scorn at colleges and universities, have come to realize it is unscientific garbage. Tragically, some lose their faith in the validity of Scripture rather than realizing they were misled by ICR, AIG, and those who stuck with the fairy tale for years out of respect for Dr. Morris, unconscionably misplaced loyalties. My concerns are identical with Dr. Austin's fairy tale that the Grand Canyon formed when a 30-mile wide, 2,000-foot limestone dam breached without a scientifically sound explanation for how. I was not in position to warn people about the canopy theory fairy tale. However, I can and will warn as many people as I can about Austin's deception, especially since AIG and ICR refuse to stop supporting it. This is Vardaman. You continue to push this issue and refuse to let it die, Pastor Lee. I want the falsehood to die and the truth to survive. Why do you fight against this reasonable goal? I had hoped that you would assist in the effort. Vardaman. Consequently, I'm writing to explain my position on the controversy, and you will hopefully leave me alone. I was involved in the disagreement between Steve Austin Austin and Walt Brown when it first arose many years ago. Pastor Lee. I have read all the documentation surrounding the dispute between Doctors Austin and Brown. To my recollection, you were never mentioned. I have sent this response to Dr. Brown for him to comment where necessary for completeness on his recollection of your involvement. His response follows mine under each statement that you make were needed. Walt Brown. Larry Vardaman's name never appeared in any of the correspondence I had with Henry Morris and Steve Austin, nor did it arise in any other communication I had with anyone. It is likely that Morris and Austin showed some of our correspondence to Vardaman and discussed matters with him, but Vardaman was not involved, as he implies above and below, in the settlement of my arbitration. There was no arbitration. Okay. All right. Vardaman, I assisted in negotiating the settlement by arbitration. I'm sorry. Okay. Let me compose myself. Pastor Lee, nothing in the record that I have read shows you provided any assistance. The record shows that the matter was never settled. Most importantly, you could not have assisted with arbitration because arbitration never happened. Doctors Morris and Austin agreed to arbitration in writing. Then after listening to legal counsel, they backed out of their written agreement with Brown and would only agree to mediation. Those who understand the difference between arbitration and mediation know why someone would want to back out of arbitration. That is, they are probably guilty. Walt Brown writes, you are correct, Pastor Lee. There was no arbitration. Vardaman is overstating his involvement. Vardaman negotiated nothing. I will assume that Vardaman forgot that Austin and Morris backed out of their written agreement to arbitrate. They said they would only mediate. I learned this in a phone call from the secretary of the arbitrator panel 4 days before the arbitration was to occur at Pepperdine University, after all preparations had been made, including the purchase of plane tickets. Despite Vardaman saying below that he read my endnote 34, I must conclude that he failed to carefully read it, because I spoke on page 214 of how betrayed I felt by Morris and Austin backing out of arbitration at the last minute, despite months of coordination with them for that arbitration. The Christian arbitration mediation firm was equally surprised. Vardaman did not assist in the settlement by arbitration because binding arbitration never happened. Pastor Lee, the documented facts show that Dr. Brown appealed to Morris and Austin to correct the record, submit to binding arbitration, or he would go public with Austin's plagiarism. At the bottom of this letter, I have listed the correspondence sequence that shows that Morris Austin acted with avoidance and deceit, then finally agreed to arbitration because Brown was otherwise going to go public. Why would Morris Austin suddenly refuse arbitration after months of correspondence and a written agreement to do so? One who carefully reads the record can guess what the answer is. Austin had plagiarized, and they were willing to take whatever measures were necessary to avoid having to correct the record, which would have resulted in public embarrassment. The record shows that following mediation, Dr. Austin and Dr. Morris' awareness violated the determination of the mediation. The record shows that following mediation, Dr. Austin, with Dr. Morris's awareness, violated the determination of the mediation panel, something they could not have done had the matter been settled in binding arbitration. Vardaman writes, at the time, apparently both Dr. Austin and Brown unfortunately chose the same name for the impounded Grand Lake, Pastor Lee. This false statement betrays that you never provided any meaningful assistance, as you claim above. At the beginning of the dispute, Dr. Austin made the ridiculous claim that he had somehow independently come up with the name Grand Lake. However, when he switched to the name Canyonlands Lake as a means to cover his plagiarism in preparation for publishing his book, he changed his tune and admitted in writing that he plagiarized the name from Dr. Brown's written work. You don't have to take my word for it. Here it is in Austin. Here is Austin during a rare moment of truth when he was writing to the lead mediator, August 29th. And you could see this if you want. There it is. But we'll just read the highlights that they want. Dr. Austin. Unfortunately, Austin, did not reference Brown as the source of the name of Grand Lake until the 93 issue of Grand Canyon Field Study Tour Guidebook. That lack of citation, plagiarism of Brown in the earlier issues, 90 to 92, of the field guidebook may have led some to believe that I was the source of the name Grand Lake. That supposition is, of course, incorrect. Okay, and Pastor Lee goes on, I believe. The fact that you make this defense of Austin shows that you could not have read my letter carefully, since the above quote is contained in the letter. Dr. Vardaman, I urge you to not judge and make erroneous comments about things you have not read. Doing so has had a detrimental effect on the creation movement and may hinder your work in the future. Vardaman writes, they both had similar concepts about how the lake formed and emptied. Pastor Lee, the documented facts show that they did not. I challenge you to read Dr. Austin's 1988 and 1989 guidebooks and then read Dr. Brown's work. There is a night and day difference. Austin and Brown, like hundreds before them, supposed that a breached lake formed the Grand Canyon. Austin wrote about how there were many problems that must be addressed before a breached dam hypothesis could be embraced. Brown, with the hydroplate theory frame of reference, made several unique and key discoveries during his fieldwork. These discoveries by Brown solved the many enigmas of the Grand Canyon, which have plagued Austin and others. Only after Dr. Brown started lecturing and writing about his details did Austin plagiarize what he could in his quest to market himself as the breach dam discoverer. But Dr. Brown's discoveries provided a scientifically sound explanation only when they are inextricably linked to the hydroplate theory. Austin could only plagiarize the name, breach point, and elevation of the lake, but he could not use the related hydroplate theory information, which makes the breach dam explanation scientifically viable. As a result, Austin was forced to twist his plagiarized information into the bad science now featured in Canham's AIG Museum. Vardaman. After much disagreement over the name of the lake and several other issues, the argument was taken to arbitration, and the use of Grand Lake supposedly settled. Pastor Lee, it was not taken to arbitration because of the last-minute violation of a written agreement by Doctors Morris and Austin. The mediator settled the use of the name Grand Lake when he told Austin to stop using the name Canyonlands Lake, since it was Brown who discovered this body of water and named it Grand Lake. But Austin refused to comply with this settlement. Instead, he bombarded the mediator with a smokescreen about federal requirements pertaining to the naming of the lake irrelevant for the extinct lake so that he could prevent the public disclosure of his plagiarism. Please read my letter so you can know the truth and stop fantasizing about what happened. Vardaman. However, Dr. Brown continued to be unhappy about the settlement because Dr. Austin would not agree that he, Dr. Brown, had developed the idea of an impounded lake prior to Dr. Austin. Pastor Lee. I am happy, as well as everyone who has read the documented record, that Austin and Morris refused to set the record straight for the sake of the truth. I am unhappy, as well as everyone who has read the documented record, that Austin and Morris refused to set the record straight for the sake of the truth and the creation movement. However, I will let Dr. Brown speak to what upset him. Walt Brown. No, I was unhappy because Austin had told others that I had plagiarized him. I provided the names and phone numbers of those witnesses, but Austin never contacted them or even tried to refute their statements. Throughout the 18-month controversy, Austin steadfastly maintained that he never accused me of plagiarism. However, I understand that in 2008 at an ICC conference, Joe Bardwell heard Austin again accuse me of plagiarizing his work concerning Grand Lake. These accusations are always made behind my back. I was aware of Austin's plagiarism and false statements about me for a few years before I spoke up. As I explained in EndNote 34, I had to finally address the matter when Austin's false statements, repeated by Russ Humphreys, were threatening a very expensive video production of Bob Gentry. If Vardaman's accusation above, that I simply was seeking priority, was correct, I would have spoken up years earlier. After the mediation, I became unhappy because over a period of 13 weeks, Austin refused 11 of my requests for him to tell me how many of his Grand Canyon books remained. That number was to be determined how we went about producing an errata sheet that Austin would place in every unsold book. Morris and Austin continually tried to frame the controversy as being about who gets credit. Vardaman apparently bought into their story. If Vardaman had read all the preliminary documents and my letters to Austin and Morris, he would have understood and would not be repeating a false story. Vardaman. Later in the debate, you became an advocate of Dr. Brown and have been agitating to obtain additional concessions from Dr. Austin and ICR. Okay, Pastor Lee. You are mistaken again, Dr. Vardaman. My efforts are solely about getting to the truth of this very important matter and exposing the falsehoods. On 3 occasions, ICR directly or indirectly brought up the mediation in such a way as to cast Dr. Brown as being the unethical party. After the 3rd occasion, I asked Dr. Brown to send me the correspondence, would have demanded had he not done so. Because of Brown's refusal to bring up the matter or discuss it, I was beginning to suspect that he, Brown, was hiding something. When I read the correspondence between Austin Morris and Dr. Brown, I realized that it was Austin who had something to hide, not Brown. Had the truth pointed to Brown being unethical, then my efforts would have been to encourage him to change his book to reflect Austin's contribution in discovering Canyonlands Lake and that Brown need to stop calling it Grand Lake. I'm not an advocate of Brown. If it appears that way, it is only because Brown is the one telling the truth, and Austin and ICR and AIG are sticking with the falsehood on this matter and many others that are also documented at our website. Vardaman. I have not been intimately involved with the latest resurgence of the controversy and have been disappointed that this disagreement will not go away, because I am convinced that Dr. Austin developed the idea of an impounded lake upstream from Page, Arizona, independently of you or Dr. Brown. Pastor Lee. How can you be convinced when there is not one shred of evidence to support that Austin discovered an impounded lake separate from Hopi Lake at 5,700 feet, which breached at Marble Canyon? Austin could not provide an audio tape of a lecture, a witness who could attest to Austin's discovery, or even a single document that showed he independently discovered Brown's Grand Lake elevation and breach point. Why? Because the record shows that he plagiarized these discoveries from Dr. Brown. If you were to carefully read my letter, you would link to Brown's memorandum of the mediation that was held on September 28, 1994 at Pepperdine University. The memorandum describes a dramatic moment when Brown asked Austin in the presence of Morris and the 4 mediators to show them anything that would indicate that he came up with the name, elevation, and breach point or existence of Grand Lake before the fall of 1988. Brown had made this request to Brown several times in the previous months to no avail. Dr. Austin hesitated, then claimed that he could. One mediator asked him where that information was. Austin said that it was in his car. The mediator, with exasperation in his voice, said, well, go get it. Austin left the room and returned 10 minutes later. A mediator said, let's see it. Austin placed a sheet of paper on the table, the Whitmore map. The mediator, who specialized in copyright infringement, studied it and said, where does this describe the lake? Austin was speechless because, as everyone who has carefully read my letter knows, the Whitmore map shows no lake at all, let alone an elevation or breach point. It was Dr. Austin's complete lack of evidence that caused the lead mediator to tell Austin to stop using the name Canyonlands Lake, something Dr. Austin later refused to do. I realized that it must have been very painful for Austin to be scooped by Brown at the Grand Canyon after he had done so much work at Mount St. Helens to try to explain the Grand Canyon. Dr. Austin may believe in his own mind that because of his work at Mount St. Helens, he preceded Brown's work in the Grand Canyon, but Dr. Austin's and others' observations about a tiny lake breaching and carving a small canyon in Washington did not even come close to answering the many enigmas surrounding the origin of Grand Canyon. Vardaman. Because I am convinced that Dr. Austin developed the idea of an impounded lake upstream from Page, Arizona, independently of you, emphasis mine, Pastor Kevin, or Dr. Brown. Pastor Lee says, by the way, I never claimed to have discovered a lake, so why do you say that Austin made a discovery independently of you, Pastor Kevin? Lardeman, I can't understand why the agreement of Dr. Austin to use a different name for the lake wasn't sufficient. Pastor Lee, the agreement was not for Austin to use a different name for the lake. The mediator told Austin to stop using the name Canyonlands Lake because Brown discovered and named the body of water Grand Lake. But Austin had already published the first run of his book with the name Canyonlands Lake, changing now would be a great embarrassment. So Austin bombarded the mediator with bogus federal requirements about naming lakes, which do not apply to extinct lakes, and successfully, tragically, caused the mediator to state he may not have the authority as the lead mediator of a dispute to force the use of a name, but stipulated to Austin that he still believed Austin should change the name. With the mediator mandate changed to a suggestion, Austin was able to continue to cover his plagiarism, but not without violating the heart of the settlement. You have to be very careful to read the entire record in order to see this very important fact clearly. Don't get fooled by Austin handing you one letter without the earlier letter from the mediator. Vardaman. Dr. Brown invited me to lunch at his home while I was speaking in Phoenix for some 4 to 5 years ago and attempted to recruit me to have ICR revisit the issue. Pastor Lee. Since I wasn't there, I will let Dr. Brown address this. Walt Brown. This is another overstatement. At lunch with Larry Vardaman, the topic of Austin's plagiarism controversy came up tangentially. I told Vardaman during lunch that Morris was telling influential people that I had threatened to take Austin and him to court, which would be a violation of a biblical prohibition, 1 Corinthians 6. That is completely false. Vardaman told me that Morris had the view that arbitration in California is like taking someone to court. That is completely false. Vardaman told me that Morris had the view that arbitration in California is like taking someone to court. Christian arbitration, which in California would have been binding, is what I was pushing. It is about as far away from court as one can get, and it does not place a dispute among Christians in the hands of non-believers. Vardaman nodded his head, and I thought he agreed with me. The closest I came to asking Vardaman to do something was to show him a standard letter ICR's Publication Information Office had been sending out for years. The letter was ICR's standard response to people who wrote and asked for ICR's position on the hydroplate theory. Anyone who has read the theory would know that the writer of that standard letter had not read the theory. When I showed Vardaman the letter at lunch, he read it, then he put it aside, saying that he had never seen it. I was hoping that he would have said that he would look into it and get back to me. That would have been the response of any hands-on manager, but I never came close to making that request. I seldom press anyone to do something. While I never asked Vardaman to do anything, as he was leaving our home, he said that he had just learned that he had been named CEO of ICR. I did comment that he would be in a position to make some changes to heal wounds. He surprised me by saying that he would try to make some changes, but he couldn't promise anything. I never asked specifically for anything. A third party, Roger Hayen, was present at the lunch and can verify what I have stated above. Vardaman. I was not convinced by his case, nor was I in a position to raise the issue once again. Pastor Lee. If Brown's recollection of what happened is correct, then what you said about it is another fabrication. Why? Vardaman. Since that time, I've been removed from any administrative role at ICR and have little or nothing to say about how things are done there any longer. Pastor Lee. I have never had an administrative role at ICR, nor do I have anything to say about how things are done at ICR. That does not prevent me from encouraging ICR to do what is right for the sake of truth and to embrace and to enhance what should be the mission of the creation movement, put out accurate and scientifically sound arguments. If you are respected at ICR, then you could have an even more powerful and positive influence for truth and good science if you can embrace the facts yourself, the facts and truth yourself. Vardaman. I request that you please stop pestering me and others who were at one time involved peripherally in this disagreement and let sleeping dogs lie. Pastor Lee. More false statements. I have not pestered you. I have put you on carbon copy on 2 letters in 2008. I sent you a direct letter this year because I knew you were an author on the flood peer review and would most likely have read Dr. Brown's work on the Grand Canyon and therefore may have seen the difference in scientific evidence between Austin and Brown. I mistakenly thought having done so would result in you having a positive role in correcting the plagiarized garbage science being on display at Ken Ham's AIG Museum. Your response causes me to stand corrected on this misplaced hope. If the dog were sleeping, I would let it lie. How can you possibly think that it is? The rabid, vicious dog of false statements, plagiarism, and garbage science is devouring unsuspecting visitors at the AIG Museum. I intend to use all the powers Jesus gives me to kill that dog before it hurts another soul. Since God has ordained that the truth will always conquer the lie, I suspect the future will hold in contempt those who allowed it, the lying dog, to live and kill. Are you sure you want to be one of them? Vardaman. I agree that the statements in the end notes of Dr. Brown's book are not flattering to either person or organization, but my understanding is that the statements were part of the negotiated settlement between Dr. Brown and Dr. Austin, and they should be left alone. No further reconciliation appears possible between the two men, and it is useless in my mind to continue to stir the pot. Pastor Lee. My goal is that people will know the truth and be aware of the most complete, scientifically sound explanation for how the Grand Canyon formed. When the truth is embraced by Austin and ICR and AIG, then reconciliation will be automatic. I rejoice that the truth is getting out and less people will be deceived by Ken Ham's AIG Museum. After I post this response to your letter, all other letters are already posted. Then I will be pointing over 200 creation organizations to the documented evidence of the truth so they can join, if they choose to, in the effort to spread the truth even further. Vardaman. In regards to my role to the true peer review panel, I have now read most of Dr. Brown's book for the first time and find that he has presented some very interesting and useful ideas. I plan to support some of his ideas about the flood in my review and will attempt to the best of my ability to ignore the controversy between him and Dr. Austin. Pastor Lee. I pray that the truth about how the flood of Noah occurred, as supported by biblical harmony, facts, and sound science, will be found, if possible, and used to make a powerful movie which will harvest more souls into the kingdom. I will be preparing for all of you that end. I will be praying for all of you to that end. Sincerely, Kevin Lee, pastor at Calvary Church, Port Orchard. Sincerely, Larry Vardaman. The following letter sequence reveals that Morris Austin acted with avoidance and deceit, then finally agreed to arbitration because Brown was otherwise going to go public. Brown asks Austin to come clean. Yeah, I think we read these. To come clean, submit to arbitration to Brown, or Brown will go public. September 9, Morris answers Brown letter to Dr. Austin, ignoring the facts of the matter, and tries to push Dr. Brown into allowing the matter to be swept under the rug. September 21st, Dr. Brown responds to Dr. Morris that the matter cannot be swept under the rug and must be corrected, submitted to arbitration, or Dr. Brown would be going public. October 5th, Dr. Morris suggests Emmett Williams, an arbitrator, later rejected by Brown because Williams' connections with ICR. October 12th, Dr. Brown lays out the plan for arbitration, notifies Morris that he is already providing documentation of Austin's plagiarisms to those who asked. Dr. Brown also provides an example letter for what Dr. Austin could write in order to end the dispute. Morris and Austin ignore this offer. November 3rd, Dr. Morris agrees to arbitration, complains about Dr. Brown starting to go public. November 10, Dr. Brown clarifies the required process for impartial arbitrator. November 24th, Austin signs agreement to arbitrate if Dr. Stephen E. Hurst, a former ICR lawyer, is the arbitrator. Dr. Austin completely ignores Dr. Brown's earlier letters outlining how an independent arbitrator is to be selected. December 17th, Dr. Morris approves Dr. Austin's letter of November 24th, 1993, which recommends a former ICA lawyer to be the arbitrator. December 23, Brown rejects ICR's choice for arbitrator. Brown proposes 6 mutual acquaintances, friends of Morris and Austin, who live in Los Angeles and could select a neutral arbitrator. December 30th, Morris selects David Cuppage as the person who will select the arbitrator. January 14, Brown points to Morris scriptural error and notes that Dr. Morris must also be party of the binding arbitration. January 20th, Morris pleads for Brown to drop the charges. March 12th, after Morris finally agrees to impartial arbitration, Brown writes to David Coppedge, selected by Morris to be the person to select arbitration. Days later, Coppedge selects the Institute for Dispute Resolution, a Christian arbitration mediation firm, to be the arbitrator. This firm then coordinates all arbitration details with the two parties, Morris, Austin, and Brown, to sign, to submit to sign and to submit to binding arbitration. Morris and Austin back out from their signed agreement 4 days before the scheduled arbitration is to take place. Let's take a look at that. Is this one that they do sign it at the bottom? Is this what they sign? Wow, I don't know. Okay. Okay, take place. Wow. So there you have it. The correspondence history between Lee and Vardaman. Lee and Whitmore. So I guess there's more of this coming with Vardaman. Let's take a peek of that. That's going to be Monday, July 6th. Wow, what a tangled web we weave. Wow. So yeah, the path, there's still information. I think you've got the gist of it, but it is rather interesting to see what people say. Okay, so, all right, let's see what the comments are. If there's any worthwhile. Hi. What are you reading, sir? Okay, let's see here. What are you reading, sir? Yeah, let's take a look at this. What am I reading? I am reading the correspondence between Vardaman. I think it's Larry Vardaman. I think he was the CEO, or he was on the board at ICR and then became the president at ICR, I believe. I could be wrong there. But I'm reading correspondence between him and Pastor Lee, who is trying to expose the plagiarism that has occurred with Grand Canyon displays. They're calling it Grand Canyon's Lake. And so it's just a mess. And basically, we are reading this because there's a theory that makes accurate predictions, and it's being ignored. And it shouldn't be ignored, but it is being ignored. And so I think one of the reasons it's ignored is because there's some plagiarism in the history of it, and somebody's trying to take credit for Walt Brown's work, and they don't want to deal with that. That'd be rather embarrassing for the scientist and for the organization, but that still doesn't change the fact that the truth is being suppressed. That's why it's being read. So that's why we are reading this. All right. So yeah, thank you for asking that. Yeah, that's what we are reading, and we want the truth to prevail. And that's what we want. And apparently the people on top can't make it happen. Maybe they want to make it happen, but there could be resistance in our organizations to allow people to think. Isn't that sad? You know, there's 2 flood models out there, and they only present one of them in the museums and other places. And so if people only see one model, they just memorize. You need to see 2 models if you want to think. So the challenge out there is which creation organization is going to allow people to think first in their museum. You know, is it going to be one of the big 3? My money's on the Broken Bow, Nebraska, the Boneyards Creation Museum. They've got the hydroplate theory in there already. And I would suggest, I have a hunch that if they want to be the first, they could be the first museum to let people think about flood models. They could have a display of the catastrophic plate tectonics, a display of the hydroplate theory, and then I would suggest put your accurate predictions down. You know, compare the predictions of each model and compare the biblical support of each model. That'd be a good display. So I encourage the creation leaders, the big ones, to say, are we indoctrinating people like the blind chancers with the Big Bang and evolution? Or are we allowing people to think about other models? Even though it's a competing model, we'll let people think. I think the first organization that allows people to think about flood models will be looked back by future generations as breaking this dam of censorship, of leading us out of this dark ages where you're only allowed to think what's presented. And that's what government museums and classrooms do, and Christians should set a higher example. Yeah, you might have a theory that disagrees with our theory, but we're going to let you present it, and then people can think. And so then you can set the example, and so lead us out of the dark ages. So which creation organization is going to do it? We'll see. So with that, we are going to take a little break and come back in a little bit. So yeah, may God bless your efforts and have a blessed day.